Every culture that has ever existed has tried to answer the same question. What happens when we die? The answers they came up with are terrifying, beautiful, and absolutely unhinged. Today I'm breaking down every major death god across world mythologies, starting with one that most people get completely wrong. Thanatos. If you ask someone to name the Greek god of death, they'll say Hades, and they'd be wrong. Hades runs the afterlife. He's the bureaucrat stamping paperwork for dead souls. Thanatos is death. The actual moment your lights go out, that's him. He was the son of Nyx, goddess of night, and his twin brother was Hypnos, god of sleep. The Greeks literally believed death and sleep were siblings. But here's where it gets fun. A king named Sisyphus once managed to chain Thanatos up. And while Thanatos was restrained, nobody on Earth could die. People getting stabbed, falling off cliffs, absolutely nothing. It took Ares to finally free him, because even war stops working when death takes a sick day. And that's not even the wildest part. In Euripides' play Alcestis, Heracles wrestles Thanatos and wins. No tricks, just brute strength. He grabbed death by the throat and forced him to release a woman's soul. Here's the thing, the Greeks didn't even picture Thanatos as scary. No skeleton, no scythe. He was a beautiful, winged young man carrying a butterfly symbolizing the soul. They looked at death and decided it should be gorgeous. But if the Greeks gave death a pretty face, the Egyptians gave it an entire infrastructure. Anubis. Anubis is one of the oldest death gods in recorded history, with worship dating back to Egypt's first dynasty around 3100 BCE. That's nearly 5,000 years ago, and the reason he has the head of a jackal isn't some deep spiritual metaphor. It's because jackals literally scavenged Egyptian cemeteries. They dug up graves, gnawed on bones, and lurked around burial sites like they owned the place. But instead of seeing that as a problem, the Egyptians looked at these graveyard scavengers and decided they were sacred divine representatives of death itself. That's one way to rebrand a pest. But here's where it gets interesting. His black coloring wasn't just about darkness or mourning. In Egyptian theology, black symbolized death and rebirth simultaneously, representing the rich, fertile silt deposited by the Nile's floods. Death, feeding new life. That duality defined everything about him. Now, Anubis originally held the top job. During the Old Kingdom, he was the supreme lord of the dead. Nobody outranked him. But then, Osiris rose to prominence, and Anubis got quietly demoted to a supporting role. The original career casualty, thousands of years before middle management existed. He still kept busy, though. Priests performing mummification rituals would wear Anubis masks during the entire process, literally becoming the god while they preserved corpses. And his most important duty survived the demotion intact, presiding over the weighing of the heart ceremony, where a dead person's heart was placed on a scale against the feather of Ma'at. Balance meant paradise. Too heavy meant oblivion. Speaking of Osiris stealing the spotlight, the god who replaced Anubis has a story that makes the demotion look like the least interesting part. Osiris. Anubis weighs your heart. Osiris watches you die. And here's the thing, Osiris knows exactly what death feels like, because he lived it. The supreme judge of the Egyptian dead was himself a murder victim. His own brother Set killed him, sealed his body in a coffin, and threw it into the Nile. But Set wasn't done. He retrieved the body, hacked it into pieces, and scattered the remains across Egypt, every piece in a different location. That's not a murder, that's a message. But his wife Isis refused to let it end there. She tracked down every single fragment of her husband's body, reassembled him, and performed the first resurrection in Egyptian mythology. Then Anubis stepped in and mummified the reassembled corpse, creating the literal template for every Egyptian burial that followed. Every mummy ever wrapped was an imitation of what Anubis did to Osiris on that table. But here's where it gets fascinating. Dead Egyptians didn't just go to Osiris for judgment, they became him. Funerary texts addressed the deceased as Osiris, followed by their actual name. You weren't visiting the god of the dead, you were merging with him. And if you failed his judgment in the Hall of Two Truths, where your heart was weighed while you recited 42 sins you hadn't committed, the monster Ammit devoured your heart. That was the second death. No coming back from that one. During the Ptolemaic period, Osiris was syncretized with Dionysus, two resurrection gods fused into one hybrid deity. Some scholars have even drawn parallels between Osiris's resurrection and later Christian resurrection theology, though that connection remains hotly debated in academic circles. But at least Osiris earned his throne through suffering. The next death god on our list simply inherited his. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now. Hades. Here's the thing, Hades got one of the worst reputations in all of mythology, and he didn't earn a single bit of it. Every movie, every game, every TV show casts him as this sinister villain scheming from the shadows. But the original Greek myths, they paint a completely different picture. Hades wasn't evil, he was a bureaucrat, a cosmic administrator who followed the rules more strictly than any other god on Olympus. And the funniest part is how he even ended up with the job. After the Olympians defeated the Titans, the three brothers divided up the cosmos. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon took the sea, and Hades, he drew the short straw, literally. The underworld was assigned by lottery. The most feared realm in all of Greek mythology was handed out like a raffle prize. There was no dark destiny, no grand cosmic punishment, just bad luck. But here's where it gets interesting. His name, Hades, means the unseen, and he lived up to it. Hades barely appears in Greek myths compared to the other Olympians. He stayed underground, minded his own business, and kept the dead where they belonged. The Greeks also called him Pluto, meaning wealth, because all the gold, silver, and fertile soil beneath the earth technically fell under his domain. So the god of death was simultaneously the god of treasure. Not exactly the villain archetype, and his actual behavior in myths proves it. When Orpheus came begging to take his dead wife Eurydice back to the surface, Hades said yes. He set one condition: don't look back. Orpheus broke the deal, not Hades. When Heracles showed up to steal his three-headed dog Cerberus, Hades didn't fight him. He negotiated. Bring the dog back when you're done. That's not a tyrant. That's a landlord with a very reasonable pet policy. The evil Hades trope is a modern invention, heavily influenced by later Christian associations between underground realms and damnation. The Greeks themselves didn't worship him out of love, but they respected him. He was fair. He was consistent. And unlike Zeus, he wasn't out there causing problems every 5 minutes. But if Hades got a bad reputation unfairly, the Norse death goddess earned hers the hard way. Hell. Every death god we've talked about so far earned their throne through cosmic inheritance or divine promotion. Hel got hers because her dad is Loki. The trickster god's daughter rules the Norse underworld, and honestly, that tells you everything you need to know about how the Norse handled death. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. It was strange. But here's where it gets really unsettling. Hel's body was literally split down the middle. One half was living flesh, warm and breathing. The other half was a rotting corpse. She existed permanently between alive and dead, not fully belonging to either world, walking, ruling, judging, all while being half decomposed. And her realm, also called Hell, wasn't even a punishment. That's the part that breaks modern brains. If you died of old age, sickness, or anything peaceful, you went to hell. Warriors who died in glorious combat went to Valhalla. Everyone else got the cold, dark basement of the world tree. It didn't matter if you were the kindest person in all of Scandinavia. Die quietly in your bed, straight to hell. Murder 40 people but go down swinging in battle. Valhalla. The Norse afterlife cared about how you died, not how you lived. But here's the part nobody talks about. When the beloved god Balder was killed, his mother Frigg begged every living thing in existence to weep for him so Hel would release his soul. And it almost worked. Every creature, every plant, every stone wept for Baldur, except one old woman who refused to cry. That old woman was Loki in disguise. Hel's own father sabotaged the only chance to free a soul from her realm. And at Ragnarök, the apocalypse itself, the dead from Hel's kingdom will sail to the final battle on a ship called Naglfar, a ship built entirely from the fingernails of human corpses. That image alone is one of the most disturbing things in all of world mythology. Hel doesn't just keep the dead, she armies them for the end of everything. But if Hel's realm feels alien and cold, the next death god operates on pure, aggressive hunger. Moti. Every death god we've covered so far has been something: a judge, a ruler, a gatekeeper. Mot isn't any of those things. Mot is just hunger. His name literally translates to death in Semitic languages, not a title, not a metaphor. The Canaanites looked at the concept of dying and said, yeah, that's him, that's the guy. And the ancient Ugaritic poetry describing him is genuinely unsettling, because Mot isn't portrayed as a king sitting on a throne. He's described as a mouth, a cosmic bottomless mouth that never stops consuming, and no offering, no sacrifice, no amount of tribute could ever satisfy him. But here's where Mot separates himself from every other deity on this list. He didn't just rule over death, he actively hunted the gods themselves. In the Baal cycle, one of the oldest religious texts ever discovered, Mot challenges Baal, the storm god responsible for rain and fertile harvests. And Mot wins. He drags Baal down into the underworld, and with the storm god gone, the rains stop. Crops wither. The earth dries into dust. Death literally defeated life, and the entire world paid for it. But Baal's sister Anat wasn't having it. She tracked Mot down, attacked him with a sword, split his body apart, winnowed him like grain, and scattered the pieces across the fields. She ground the god of death like wheat. It's one of the most violently creative kills in all of mythology, and it happened to death itself. The whole cycle mirrors the actual Levantine climate, where brutal droughts would devastate communities before the rainy season returned. Storm god versus death god wasn't just mythology, it was weather, explained through divine warfare. And Mot's influence didn't end with Canaan. As Canaanite and Israelite cultures merged over centuries, scholars believe Mot's fingerprints crept into Old Testament theology, quietly shaping how an entire civilization would think about death for millennia. But Mot is a relatively obscure figure. The next death god on our list ruled one of the oldest known underworlds in human history, and her story involves one of the most famous descents into hell ever written. Ereshkigal. Before there was Hades, before there was Yama, before any death god on this list even existed in written form, there was Ereshkigal. Her name translates to Queen of the Great Below, and she ruled the underworld of the oldest documented civilization on Earth. We're talking Sumerian mythology, roughly 3000 BCE, and the wildest part, you've probably never heard of her. But here's the thing. Ereshkigal wasn't just old, she was terrifyingly absolute. The underworld she governed, called Irkalla, operated on a set of laws so rigid that not even the highest gods in existence could override them. And we know this because one of them tried. The goddess Inanna, Queen of Heaven, decided she was going to walk into the underworld uninvited. Bad move. Ereshkigal's domain had 7 gates, and at each one, Inanna was forced to surrender something. Her crown at the first gate, her royal robes at another, her divine power at the next. Gate by gate, symbol by symbol, the most powerful goddess in Sumerian mythology was stripped of everything that made her a god. By the time she stood before Ereshkigal, she was completely naked, powerless, and utterly mortal. And then Ereshkigal killed her. But here's where it gets fascinating. She didn't do it out of cruelty. She did it because those were the rules. The underworld's laws applied equally to everyone, peasant or deity, and Ereshkigal enforced them without exception. That makes her arguably the most purely just death god on this entire list. No favoritism, no negotiations, just law. And yet nobody worshipped her for it. Despite commanding the oldest written underworld mythology in human history, Ereshkigal had no major temples, no festivals, no grand celebrations. The Mesopotamians respected her, but they didn't celebrate her. Her realm wasn't punishment either. It was just less. The dead existed in darkness and dust, diminished versions of themselves regardless of how virtuous they'd been in life. No reward, no punishment, just quiet deprivation forever. The most ancient, most fair, most procedurally just death god ever recorded, and humanity collectively decided to pretend she didn't exist. But if Ereshkigal's story feels bleak, wait until you hear about a death goddess who started as a creator of entire worlds before everything went horribly wrong, Izanami. Every death god we've talked about so far started as one. They were born into the role, assigned to it, or they simply were death from the beginning. Izanami's different. She started as the opposite. She was a creator, literally the mother of Japan itself. According to the Kojiki, Japan's oldest written record, Izanami and her husband Izanagi stood on the floating bridge of heaven and created the Japanese islands through their union. She gave birth to gods of wind, sea, and mountains. She was life in its purest, most productive form, but then she gave birth to Kagutsuchi, the god of fire, and the fire burned her from the inside out. She died in agony, and her spirit descended to Yomi, the Japanese underworld. The goddess who created an entire civilization became a rotting corpse trapped beneath it. Here's where it gets devastating. Izanagi couldn't accept it. He traveled to Yomi to bring her back, found her in total darkness, and begged her to return. Izanami agreed, but with one condition. Don't look at me until we reach the surface. He looked. He lit a torch and saw her body crawling with maggots, bloated and decomposing, barely recognizable as the woman who built the world beside him. And if that sounds familiar, it should. It's the Orpheus myth, beat for beat, from a completely unrelated civilization on the other side of the planet. But here's the twist that makes it uniquely Japanese. Eurydice just faded away. Izanami chased her husband. She pursued him through the underworld in a screaming rage, trying to drag him back into death with her. Izanagi barely escaped, sealing the entrance to Yomi with a massive boulder, and through that boulder, Izanami screamed that she would kill 1,000 people every single day. Izanagi's response? Then I will give life to 1,500. That exchange is one of the most quietly profound moments in all of world mythology. The entire cycle of human birth and death explained as a marital argument between two gods who loved each other and couldn't let go. But if Izanami's tragedy hits you in the chest, the next death god on this list goes for the stomach. Ah Pooch doesn't do grief, he does rot. Ah Pooch. The Maya didn't sugarcoat their afterlife. They named it Xibalba, which literally translates to place of fear. Not land of the dead, not the beyond, not some poetic euphemism. Place of fear. And honestly, that's the most accurate name any civilization ever gave their underworld, because Xibalba was specifically engineered to destroy you. Ah Pooch ruled this 9-level nightmare, and each level was designed around a different method of breaking souls. The House of Cold would freeze you, the House of Jaguars would tear you apart, the House of Fire would burn you alive, the House of Bats would, well, you can probably figure that one out. This wasn't a courtroom like Osiris ran, or a bureaucratic system like Hades maintained. This was an obstacle course built by a death god who wanted you to fail. But here's where the story takes a turn nobody expects. Two kids beat him. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Expalanki, descended into Xibalba and challenged Apuch and his entire underworld council to a series of supernatural contests. They survived every house, dodged every trap, and then came the final showdown, a Mesoamerican ball game played on Apuch's home court, in his own realm, under his own rules. And the twins won. Apuch, a literal death god, got humiliated in front of his entire demonic council by two teenagers. Try finding another mythology where that happens. You won't. But here's the part that genuinely surprised me. The Maya didn't just fear Apuch. They prepared for him. Their burial practices included written incantations placed alongside the dead, essentially cheat sheets for navigating Xibalba's trials. Literacy was a survival tool for the afterlife. You could read your way past death. Even after the Spanish conquest shattered continuous Maya religious transmission, contemporary Maya communities across Guatemala, Belize, and Mexico still maintained syncretized practices preserving these ancient death concepts. Apuch never fully disappeared. But if you think the Maya underworld sounds brutal, wait until you meet the Aztec death god who made souls spend 4 years earning their rest. Mictlantecutli. Every death god we've covered so far has one thing in common. They judge you based on how you lived. Were you virtuous? Were you brave? Were you righteous? Mictlantecutli doesn't care about any of that. In Aztec theology, your afterlife destination was determined entirely by how you died. Not how you lived, how your body gave out. Warriors who fell in battle went to one afterlife. Women who died in childbirth went to another. Drowning victims got their own destination entirely. But here's the thing. The vast majority of Aztecs, regardless of whether they were saints or monsters, all ended up in the same place. Mictlan. And Mictlan was not a reward. It was a 4-year journey through 9 underground levels of pure nightmare. Jaguars, deserts of razor wind, rivers of blood. Supernatural obstacles designed to break you at every turn, and you couldn't survive it empty-handed. The living were obligated to bury obsidian knives, jade beads, and specific sacred knowledge with the dead. If your family forgot something or got the ritual wrong, your soul would fail. You'd be trapped forever between levels with no way forward and no way back. But here's where it gets truly spectacular. Mictlantecuhtli wasn't just a gatekeeper. He was the reason humanity exists, and he didn't even want to be. The god Quetzalcoatl descended into Mictlan to steal the bones of previous human creations directly from Mictlantecuhtli's domain. The death god set trap after impossible trap to stop him, but Quetzalcoatl succeeded, took those stolen bones, mixed them with divine blood, and created us. Humanity is built from the death god's stolen property. And his influence didn't end with the Aztec Empire. Mictlantecuhtli was depicted as a skeletal figure draped in spider webbing, owl feathers, and disembodied eyeballs. That aesthetic directly shaped the visual language of Mexico's Day of the Dead. When Spanish conquistadors arrived and tried to suppress his worship, it didn't disappear. It merged. Pre-Columbian death theology fused with Catholic afterlife beliefs into what became Dia de Muertos, a tradition still practiced by millions today. The conquistadors tried to kill a death god, and he outlasted them all. But Mictlantecuhtli isn't the only death god whose judgment system shaped an entire civilization's relationship with mortality. In Hindu mythology, there's one who took it even further, Yama. Every death god we've covered so far inherited their title. They were born into it, appointed to it, or seized it through divine politics. Yama didn't do any of that. He earned his position the hard way. He died. Yama was the first mortal to ever die, and because he was first, he became the ruler of every soul that followed. He didn't conquer the underworld. He discovered it. He walked a path that didn't exist yet. And by walking it, he became the guide for every human being who would ever take that same journey. That's a fundamentally different origin story than anything else on this list. But here's where it gets fascinating. Yama shows up in the Rig Veda, dating back to roughly 1500 to 1200 BCE, making him one of the oldest named death deities still actively worshipped today. Not a relic, not a museum piece, a living part of Hindu religious tradition thousands of years later. And unlike most death gods, Yama doesn't just collect souls, he teaches. In the Katha Upanishad, a young man named Nachiketa arrives at Yama's door and demands the secret of what happens after death as payment for a broken promise. Yama tries to talk him out of it, offers him wealth, long life, anything else. Nachiketa refuses. So Yama, bound by his word, sits down and explains the deepest mysteries of the soul, consciousness, and existence itself. Death becomes the greatest philosophy teacher in all of mythology. He's also called Dharmaraj, king of Dharma, because in Hindu theology, death isn't random. It's the final enforcer of karma. Every action, every choice, every consequence from your entire life gets settled through Yama's judgment. He doesn't punish arbitrarily, he balances the cosmic ledger. But here's the part that makes Yama truly unique on this list. He can be beaten in a debate. In the Savitri myth, a woman follows Yama after he claims her husband's soul and argues so brilliantly, so morally, that Yama doesn't just return her husband. He grants her children, prosperity, and spiritual reward on top of it. No tricks, no violence, no divine loopholes. She simply out-argued death itself. Then there's the Buddhist transformation. In Tibetan Buddhism, Yama becomes something barely recognizable, a terrifying buffalo-headed deity draped in skulls and flames. The same god, refracted through a completely different theological lens, it twisted into something that would make his Vedic version unrecognizable. But if Yama represents death as a wise teacher and fair judge, the next deity on this list represents something far more primal. Death as pure, unstoppable, cosmic destruction. Kali. Every death god on this list governs death as a domain. They manage it, judge it, administer it. Kali doesn't govern death. She is the principle that makes death necessary in the first place. Her name in Sanskrit, Kala, means both death and time. Not as a coincidence, but as a philosophical statement, time is what makes everything temporary. Time is what guarantees that every single thing in existence will eventually end. Kaylee doesn't just represent death, she represents the force that makes death unavoidable for everything that has ever existed or ever will. But here's where it gets interesting, because the way she looks tells a completely different story than what you'd expect. Jet black skin, a necklace of severed heads, a belt made of disembodied human arms, her tongue dripping blood. If you've seen her depicted anywhere, your first reaction was probably that she's terrifying. And she is. But every single element of her appearance is a precise philosophical symbol, not shock imagery. The severed heads represent dissolved egos. The arms represent severed karma. The black skin represents the void beyond all form and illusion. Nothing about her design is random. Her origin story is just as deliberate. Kali wasn't born through conventional means. No father, no husband, no male authority involved. She erupted directly from the forehead of the goddess Durga in the middle of a battle, a concentrated manifestation of pure destructive divine power called forth because nothing else was strong enough to win the fight. And the fight she was called for proves exactly why she needed to exist. The demon Raktabija had an ability that made him essentially unkillable. Every single drop of his blood that hit the ground spawned 1,000 new demons. You cut him, you lose. You stab him, you lose worse. The battlefield would flood with copies faster than any army could destroy them. So Kaylee solved the problem in the only way that worked. She drank his blood before it ever touched the ground. She didn't defeat him through violence. She defeated him through consumption, removing the mechanism of regeneration entirely. But here's the part that transforms everything about how you understand this goddess. In Bengal's devotional tantric traditions, worshippers didn't approach Kali with fear. They called her Kali Ma, mother. They addressed her with direct emotional intimacy that was rarely extended to any other deity in the Hindu tradition. The most terrifying death goddess in any mythology became the ultimate expression of maternal love, a mother whose love destroys your illusions rather than destroying you. She dances on corpses. Sometimes she dances on Shiva himself, the highest male deity in the entire pantheon. That image isn't chaos, it's a statement. Time and death dance on everything that exists. There is nothing, not even the supreme god, that falls outside her domain. And yet Western popular culture has consistently reduced all of this to a simple villain. Movies, TV shows, video games, they collapse centuries of sophisticated philosophical and devotional theology into a one-dimensional evil figure. Out of every deity on this entire list, Kali is arguably the most misrepresented in modern media. A goddess whose worshippers approached her as a loving mother gets flattened into a monster because the surface imagery is easier to exploit than the actual meaning behind it. That gap between appearance and meaning is the entire point, not just of Kali, but of every death god we've covered today. Every single one of them is more complex, more philosophically rich, and more deeply human than the shallow versions popular culture has sold you. Death isn't simple, and neither are the gods humanity created to understand it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.